The Senior Bowl is over. That means it's mock draft season, and a lot of recent mocks have something in common for the New York Jets. We'll talk about it today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Thursday, February 8th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangrenNation.com, thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review, and if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for your first deposit match of up to $100 using PrizePicks. Today we're going to look through some recent mock drafts from some major media companies. It is mock draft season, and things really start to pick up after the Senior Bowl, which of course occurred last weekend in Mobile, Alabama. Now, I understand mock drafts are just predictions. They're just prognostications about where players may go. But I think that they're interesting from a couple of standpoints. And there actually are some teams in the NFL who have admitted that they do follow mock drafts from major media sources, because some of the people who put out these mock drafts are pretty connected within the league. They speak with teams. They get a sense of which teams are interested in which players. They also get a sense of, where players are valued in the league. So in one sense, it gives you like a broad indicator of where a player may go. A lot of the connected writers will tell you if this guy's projected to go 9th overall, it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be the 9th overall pick, but it means it's somewhere in that range, maybe in that 7 to 12 range. So it gives you kind of a broad idea of who's going to be available for the New York Jets. Second is each of these mock drafts is different. Different players go at different spots. It gives you a chance to kind of game out what the scenarios the Jets may deal with when they are on the clock. And again, I'll give you another caveat here. We understand that still a lot of the process to go. We still have the combine. We still have pro days. We still have team visits. Still a lot to go. Player stock could go up or down, but good chance to gauge where players are valued right now and what the Jets' options may be with the 10th overall pick, assuming they stay there, assuming they don't either trade up or trade out of the pick. So the first mock I want to go to is from Pro Football Focus, and it was done by actually two friends of this podcast, Trevor Sikkema and Connor Rogers, two guys who have appeared on the show in the past. Now, this, I think, is kind of like the chalk scenario. This is kind of the scenario that seems most likely to me of the three we're going to discuss, at least at this moment of time. So they have 3 quarterbacks going off the board, 1, 2, 3, which seems pretty likely. Caleb Williams goes to the Bears, the quarterback out of USC. Drake May out of North Carolina goes to Washington, and Jalen Daniels out of LSU goes to New England. Now, I'm of two minds when we talk about whether we want quarterbacks to fall to the Jets, because part of me feels like, the Jets aren't really interested in the quarterback. So whenever a player at a position they're not interested in goes ahead of them, it pushes a player at a position that may interest them down. On the other hand, a team might look to trade up for a quarterback and overpay the Jets, because we've seen in recent years that teams kind of throw out the draft value chart when it comes to trading up for quarterbacks. They will overpay to get a quarterback. So maybe it's better if a quarterback falls to the Jets. And in any event, in this mock, quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3. 4th overall, Marvin Harrison Jr., the receiver out of Ohio State, goes to Arizona. Breaks my heart. Want to see Marvin Harrison Jr. in green and white. Don't think it's going to happen. At number 5, the Chargers pick Brock Bowers, the tight end out of Georgia. At 6, the Giants pick Rome Odunze, the wide receiver out of Washington. Breaks my heart. 7, the Titans take Joe Alt, the tackle out of Notre Dame. Breaks my heart. At 8, the Falcons take an edge rusher, Jared Verse, out of Florida State. At 9, the Bears take Malik Neighbors, a wide receiver out of LSU. And we get to the 10th overall pick, which is the New York Jets, and Sikkema and Rogers have the Jets taking Olu Fashanu, tackle out of Penn State. And I think that you almost know that it's going to be Fashanu if this is the way things play out. I think that there are 5 players. If I had to guess, and this is not an insider information, this is just me guessing, but it's an educated guess. It's not, I'm not just like pulling this out of thin air. I think it's very logical to presume that the Jets are either going to take a wide receiver or a tackle if they stay with the 10th overall pick. And my guess is that there's 5 players the Jets are really interested in right now, because these are like the consensus guys who are the top guys at the tackle and wide receiver positions. One is Marvin Harrison Jr., probably not going to fall to the Jets at 10. One is Malik Neighbors, the wide receiver out of LSU. He could fall to the Jets at 10. It's not inconceivable. Another is Rome Odunze, the wide receiver out of Washington. Possibly, not in this mock, but possibly. Another is Joe Alt, the tackle out of Notre Dame, a dream scenario. The last guy of the 5 is Olu Fashanu, the tackle out of Penn State. And I think if 4 of these 5 guys are gone and only one's left, that's the guy the Jets are picking at 10. And in this case, you see it. You have Harrison going off the board at 4. You have Odunze going off at 6. You have Alt going off at 7, and Neighbors going off at 9. So if those 4 guys go, and there's only Fashanu of the 5 available, that's who the pick's going to be. And I think that that's true. If 4 of the 5 guys are gone, no matter who the 5th guy is, whether it's Odunze, whether it's Neighbors, whoever's available from those 5 is going to be the Jets pick. And that's going to be a very easy pick, I think, for the Jets to make, because they will be able to address one of their core needs. And Fashanu is a guy who projects to the left tackle position. A couple of days ago, we talked about Talisa Fuaga, and I talked about how I think he's more of a right tackle. I think Fashanu is a left tackle, and he's a guy who could be a plug and play guy. I mean, he's the type of guy who could potentially project to be somebody you stick at the left tackle position, and then you don't have to worry about it for another decade. He's a guy who's nimble on his feet. And of course, if you're playing the left tackle position, you got to be athletic, because you're going to be left on an island one-on-one against some of the most explosive pass rushers in the league. But you also have a lot on your plate, because at the right tackle, at least the quarterback can see the pass rusher the right tackle is going up against. At left tackle, you're on your own. You're one-on-one, and if you miss a block, your quarterback could get drilled, and he may not see it coming. Fashanu projects as a solid run blocker, a guy who, good technique in general, but I think in the run game, sometimes, he loses his hand placement a little bit. He doesn't play with a ton of power, but, with the Jets in 2024, the number one job, I think, of any offensive lineman is going to be to protect Aaron Rodgers, because at the end of the day, if you can keep Aaron Rodgers from being pressured, he's going to do really well. I think at 40, there are some question marks Aaron Rodgers is going to be bringing to the table. And we'll probably talk about those as the offseason progresses. But one thing I think will be true of Aaron Rodgers is that he's still going to be able to dissect a defense. If a receiver breaks open, he's still going to be able to make the throw. So you want to make sure he's protected. And if the Jets are throwing Mekhi Becton out there next year, if they're throwing Dwayne Brown out there next year, he's not going to be protected. And I think that that's probably goes without saying, that's one of the top reasons the Jets are going to be interested at the tackle position. But I think in general in this draft, there are 2 guys who project as potential plug-and-play left tackles. Alt is one of them. He seems to be the consensus top tackle on the board. Fashanu seems to be the other one. I think if the Jets can get him at 10, they're going to be very happy with that. And of course, a lot of this depends on how things play out in the offseason. I mean, part of the reason I love the Fashanu potential pick is that it means potentially we won't be seeing David Bakhtiari in green and white, which I think would be a good thing for the Jets. So PFF, I think that this is a pretty likely scenario. I think it's very plausible that of the 5 guys I mentioned, of Harrison, Neighbors, Odunze, Alt, Fashanu, probably one of them is going to be available at 10. And if one of them is, I think there's a good chance Fashanu is going to be the guy. I think he's very likely going to be the New York Jets pick at 10th overall. But there's another mock out there from ESPN, Matt Miller, that has kind of the doomsday scenario for the New York Jets. All 5 of these guys are gone. Who would the Jets pick then? I kind of gave you an indication the other day, but we'll go into more detail as we continue on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Well, our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. And the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capacity. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Again, that's nissanusa.com. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you are hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. We're talking about players the Jets may draft today. The Jets have a scouting staff, a full front office to vet these players, but your small business might need a little bit more help than that. You should know that LinkedIn is not just another jobs board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 8 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. And LinkedIn does all this while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Geez, imagine if the Jets had an 86% hit rate on their draft picks. That's incredible. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and may not have the time or resources to hire. So LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. New episodes each day, Monday through Friday. You should also know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And you can now also find it on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV. And today on Locked On Jets, we're focusing on mock drafts. We're kind of playing out the scenarios for the New York Jets. And interesting thing about all these mock drafts, and it's no surprise, they all have the Jets drafting an offensive lineman, a tackle in particular. What happens, though, if the top tackles are off the board? That's the situation that played itself out in a mock draft done by Matt Miller of ESPN. Now, Matt Miller's mock, which came out earlier this week, has a very similar top four. In fact, it's an identical top four to the PFF mock draft we did. Caleb Williams goes 1 overall to Chicago. Drake May, the quarterback out of North Carolina, 2 to Washington. Jalen Daniels, the quarterback out of LSU, 3 to New England. So again, quarterbacks 1, 2, 3. Some good and some bad for that from the Jets. It's good because Jets aren't taking a quarterback, so teams drafting quarterbacks push players down to the Jets they may be interested in, but not in this scenario. Because Marvin Harrison Jr. again goes 4 to Arizona. Malik Neighbors goes 5 to Los Angeles, the Chargers. So that's a guy the Jets could be interested in. And then at 6, Roma Dunze, the wide receiver, goes from Washington, goes to the Giants. At 7, Joe Alt, the offensive tackle out of Notre Dame, goes to the Titans. At 8, Terrion Arnold, a cornerback out of Alabama, goes to the Falcons. And Olu Finashu, the guy we just talked about, the tackle out of Penn State, goes to the Bears at 9. So, I just told you the 5 guys the Jets are interested in. This is kind of like the nightmare scenario that Matt Miller laid out. You've got Harrison, Neighbors, Odunze, Alt, Fashanu. They're all gone by 10. Well, the Jets end up taking in this mock a player I profiled the other day, Talisa Fuaga, the tackle out of Oregon State. And Matt Miller also kind of does a mock free agency for the Jets. And in Matt Miller's scenario, the Jets have signed Tyron Smith, the tackle from the Dallas Cowboys. Now, as I mentioned the other day with Fuaga, I think he's like the third guy who could be a plug-and-play tackle from this class. But I think he's more limited to the right side. I think he's not as strong of a pass protector as Alt or Fashanu are. And I think he's a guy who may not be quite athletic enough to play the left tackle position. And I say that not because pass blocking at right tackle is unimportant, but something I mentioned in the first segment. At least at right tackle, your quarterback can see the guy who your right tackle is blocking. So if your right tackle whips, the quarterback can see that he can get the ball out quickly. He can throw it away. Sometimes if the defender who's rushing the passer is pushed wide enough, the quarterback can step up in the pockets. Now, I think the challenge here, though, is that if the Jets don't get a left tackle in the draft, that means that they will need to have signed somebody. And there's no guarantee they're going to get Tyron Smith, and there's no guarantee they're going to get David Bakhtiari. And quite frankly, I don't think either of those would be a particularly great signing. I think you'd have an easier time talking me into the Matt Miller scenario with Tyron Smith than you would the David Bakhtiari scenario. But in either event, the Jets would be signing a guy in his 30s who struggles to stay on the field. And this scenario, more than anything, tells me why the Jets need to address as many of their holes as they can in free agency. There may not necessarily be a high-level guy available at either tackle position or at the wide receiver position, but there are clearly guys who are upgrades over what the Jets had in 2023. There are tackles out there they could sign who will be upgrades over Mekhi Becton and Dwayne Brown and Billy Turner and Max Mitchell and Carter Warren. There are certainly wide receivers out there who will be upgrades over Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb. Now, of course, you hope for some internal improvements. If Carter Warren or like a Jason Brownlee or an Xavier Gibson can step into a bigger role, that's great, but I don't think you can count on any of them to really be big-time players for you in 2024. And I think that if the Jets only address one of the two needs, now I think we know that a lot of the free agency money is going to either tackle or wide receiver, but I think that they have to try and strategize and find a way that both can be addressed. I think it's going to be difficult for either of those, for both spots to go into the draft as strengths. I don't think they're going to be able to get a big time free agent at both spots, but I think at least on some level, they have to be addressed. I think they have to go into the draft without either spot being a glaring need, because let's imagine a scenario where the Jets can't get a left tackle. Now, as I told you the other day, I think that there's a lot to like about Fuaga. I think that he's a guy who could be a day one starter at the right tackle position. But I don't think he can play left tackle. I don't think he's going to be able to play left tackle successfully in the NFL, at least at the start. And if you go into the draft needing a left tackle, you're really leaving yourself behind the 8 ball, because left tackle is a premium position. It's a really tough position to fill. And you can't count on the draft filling it, because the scenario where the two left tackles go off the board is plausible. I tend to think the Jets will get one of the guys that they want, but there's no guarantee both of the left tackles either of the left tackles falls to the Jets at 10. In that case, they've put themselves in a really tough position. It shows you the challenge the Jets face this offseason, because they're not entering with a ton of cap space either. They've not managed their cap particularly well, so they'll have to figure out machinations to open up some cap space to bring guys in. But this stuff is going to be easier said than done. It's not going to be easy for the New York Jets. Fuaga, I think, would be a good pick. And I think if this is the scenario, they may even look to trade down, because I'm not convinced Fuaga is going to go that quickly. Now, in a league where offensive linemen are needed, it would be a risk to trade down a bit. If you do trade down, maybe some team jumps in front of you for Fuaga and you end up stuck with J.C. Latham. So there is a risk involved. But the Jets also do need to consider that they're without a second-round pick this year. Second round is really the meat and potatoes of the NFL draft. And I think that in this scenario, the trade down might be the best move for the Jets. I think the trade down might be the best move anyway, but if the 5 guys that I think that they're really targeting are all gone, maybe you try and move, maybe you roll the dice that you can still grab Fuaga later and then get a second-round pick in return. I think that might be the way to go for the New York Jets in the Matt Miller scenario. But what if all the conventional wisdom is wrong? And what if the Jets get the guy who's the consensus best tackle in the NFL draft at 10? Well, there's one mock draft that actually has that scenario playing out. I think it would be the Jets' dream scenario. And we'll talk about what that is as we continue on this Thursday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by DoorDash. The big game's coming up Sunday. Kansas City Chiefs, San Francisco 49ers. Whether you're on your couch or hosting a party, I don't think you want to cook a big meal. I think you just want to be able to relax and enjoy the day with friends and family. That's where DoorDash comes in. DoorDash can connect you with so many great restaurants in the New York area or wherever you live. Really simple. All you do is pull out your device, open up the app, find your favorite restaurant, order your favorite meal with just a couple of taps. You'll have a delicious meal delivered to you by a Dasher in no time. So many great options in the New York area, including Daily Provisions in Union Square. At Daily Provisions, you can count on finding just the right meal or ingredients for home cooking. For lunch, try the Kale Caesar with crispy chickpeas and soft-boiled eggs with dressing so good you can buy a bottle. And right now, you can get up to 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply. Again, that's 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. It's one word with no space, LOCKED, number 2, number 3. Subject to change, terms apply. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Thursday. We're taking a look at some of the mock drafts that have been put out by members of the media after the Senior Bowl. And as much as anything, I think mock drafts are useful because they kind of lay out the scenarios the Jets could deal with because they don't know who the 9 players will be selected before they pick 10th overall. Chris Trapasso of CBS Sports put out a really interesting mock draft, and this one is not chalk at all. This one has to take some interesting twists and turns. This one has Caleb Williams going number 1 overall, but to Washington. They have the Bears trading up from 2 to 1. Then the Bears take Jalen Daniels at 2. Now, that's an interesting one. That would be a very gutsy move by Chicago. At 3, the Patriots take Marvin Harrison Jr. At 4, the Cardinals take Rome Odunze. At 5, the Chargers take Byron Murphy, a defensive lineman out of Texas. At 6, Drake May falls to the Giants, the quarterback out of North Carolina. At 7, this is really interesting. Talisa Fuaga, the tackle out of Oregon State, goes to Tennessee. He's the first tackle off the board in this scenario. Latu out of USC, an edge rusher, goes to the Falcons at 8. At 9 goes Malik Neighbor. So if this scenario plays itself out, the Jets would have their pick of Joe Alt out of Notre Dame and Olu Funashu out of Penn State. I mean, that's like the dream scenario for the New York Jets. And Chris Trapasso has the Giants taking Joe Alt at 10th overall. Now, in that scenario, I actually wonder whether the Jets might look to trade down because they think, they can get one of these 2 tackles. And sometimes if you're in a scenario where you want to take a player at a certain position, but you have 2 guys graded roughly equally, then you look to trade down because you say, you know what, I'll be happy with either of these guys, but let me add some more picks later on. And for a team that's short on draft capital, that might be the move for the Jets right there. But if the Jets are at 10 and they have these 2 options in front of them, they also might just say, we're going to take Joe Alt. We're not going to throw away this gift, because in many ways, I think Joe Alt falling to 10 would be a gift for the New York Jets. He is the consensus top tackle in this class, and intelligent people can disagree. Obviously, CBS Sports seems to disagree because they have Fuaga going ahead of Alt and Funashu. And look, I like Fuaga. I wouldn't take him ahead of Joe Alt. Joe Alt, as much as Olu Funashu is a plug-and-play guy or projects as a plug-and-play guy out of Penn State, Joe Alt is like the safest pick in the draft. Now, I say that with some degree of trepidation because there's never a player who's 100% safe. And there's never a player who's a 100% lock to be good. There's no such thing as a can't-miss pick. I've seen can't-miss picks miss. But Joe Alt enters the league. He's got the tools you want at the tackle position. I mean, maybe he's not quite as strong as he needs to be yet in the run game, but I mean, he's technically very sound. He's very athletic. He's the kind of guy you can trust one-on-one. I mean, I don't want to say against the best pass rushers in the NFL, but I think there's a very high degree of confidence that Joe Alt's going to be a quality starting tackle right off the bat. And, you get into trouble when you make lofty proclamations. I'm not here to tell you Joe Alt's definitely heading to the Hall of Fame. We don't know how good he's going to be, but he has a chance to be really good. He has a chance to be one of the top tackles in the NFL. And even if he's not, the scenario that's not the boom scenario for Joe Alt, still pretty good. I still think he could be a very good tackle. I think back to 2006, the Jets drafted DeBrickashaw Ferguson 4th overall, and there were hopes he was going to be an all-pro guy, and there were hopes he was going to be a perennial Pro Bowler. Never really happened, but he still was an excellent pick because he locked it down in a position that's critical for a decade for the Jets. Left tackle is one of those spots. If you have a guy who's really good, that makes a big difference for your team. You don't necessarily need to be an all-pro to make a difference at the left tackle position, because your quarterback doesn't have to be worried about being hit from his blind side. That's a really good thing for your team, and it's especially good when your quarterback's 40 years old and will likely have diminished mobility. I can't say that I expect Joe Alt to fall, but one thing I will say is sometimes what happens in the draft does not match the chalk. I mean, sometimes I see some of these mock drafts and people say, that's a terrible mock draft. How can you have this guy falling that far? But it seems like every single year there's one player you don't expect to fall very far who ends up going way later than is expected. Now, will it be Joe Alt this year? I kind of doubt it, because he's the consensus top tackle. He plays a critical position. Everybody wants a left tackle in this league. And I find it tough to believe he's going to go. The top left tackle in this draft is going to get all the way to 10, especially given where we're at in the NFL, especially the crisis that's taking place at the tackle position. But it could happen. I mean, it's not, there's a non-zero chance of it happening, even if it's not the most likely scenario at this point in time. If the Jets do that, that's what I call the dream scenario. Not only does more than one of the guys, the 5 guys that I mentioned, fall, you get your pick of the consensus top 2 tackles in this draft. So, hey, well, here's hoping CBS Sports is right, because that would be an outstanding scenario for the New York Jets. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and you're listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Have a great Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to close out the week.